And welcome back to the second hour of our program, my friends. As promised, I want to share with you something that, on the one hand, is something that we should all be knowing about and thinking about as science, as at the micro level, the level of us as individuals. And on the other hand, has something to do with why our planet is melting down at the macro level, the big picture. Why our planet is melting down, why our culture is so dysfunctional, why we're destroying the world. And it has to do with worms. I wrote a chapter for my new book, Threshold, which is not out yet, but will be in a few months. And this chapter is titled Unnatural Selection. And it starts out, I remember the German toilets. And I have to tell you this story. When Louise and I first started visiting Germany in 1978, when we started working with Kinder and Jugendhilfswerk Salem, with SalemInternational.org is their website. And I've done international relief work with that agency for 30 years, and we created a community for abused kids based on their model. And they run three children's villages in Germany and programs all over the world. And in fact, we'll be broadcasting our show from there, assuming that we can work out all the details, in about 3 weeks. But in any case, when we first started going to Germany back in the late 70s and the early 80s, many, maybe even most, of the toilets that you would see in Germany, and you would find this occasionally in other countries as well. I've saw them in Belgium, I saw them in Holland, were what are referred to, and you can Google this is a hoot, they were referred to as the lay-and-display or continental shelf toilets. And basically what it is the toilet there was a little platform about 6 or 8 inches below the seat that you did your business on, and it just sat there, right there in the open air for you to look at. You could poke a stick into it if you wanted. And then when you flushed the toilet, the water would come flushing in from the front, and it would shove it all to the back where there was about a 3-inch hole, and it would go down the drain. And I couldn't figure it out. I thought the Germans must be poop obsessed. They're all into scatological weirdness or something. And in fact, one time, Louise and I, the red light district in Frankfurt is just a block from the downtown Frankfurt train station. And there used to be anyway, they've closed it since then, but back in the 80s, just one of the world's very best Thai restaurants was 2 blocks into the red light district, 2 blocks away from the main Hauptbahnhof in Frankfurt. And we used to love to eat there. And you walk by these shops, the porno shops, and very often they had these really weird things in the window, people peeing on each other and stuff like that. And so I thought that the toilets were just a symptom of the Germans having a bizarre fetish with excrement. Well, it turns out it wasn't that at all. And now, by the way, most German toilets are just like American toilets. You do your business and it drops into a pool of water. The reason why they were the way that they were, and they were that way all over Europe and much of the world, was because back then, back before the 1960s, 70s, basically, most people had worms. And it wasn't, a terrible problem. It didn't cause people to, die from worm infestations, but it was kind of creepy. And so people would take a look at their business, and if they saw something moving around in it, then they'd know that next day they would do what was called a purge. You take bitters, and the Germans were really big on bitters. You drink down some of these bitters, and you have the worms come in, the worms go out. See, this is the thing. You drink the bitters, and you take senna leaf or some other kind of violent laxative, and it would cause the worms that were attached to your gut to go, ah! And they'd let go, and then whoosh, everything goes out, and you do a purge, and it gets rid of the worms for a few months. But what happened in the 50s and 60s, particularly in the 1960s, was that that new generations of antibiotics were developed that didn't just kill bacteria, they killed worms as well. And so now, 40 years later, pretty much nobody has worms anymore. Now, why am I going off about worms? Well, because of some really, really interesting research that has been done. 3 generations ago, this reading from my book, Threshold, 3 generations ago, only 1 in 10,000 people in the United States had inflammatory bowel disease, IBD, or sometimes referred to as IBS, where people have, they get diarrhea, they get constipation, it goes back and forth, things like that. Crohn's disease was rare. Multiple sclerosis was virtually unknown to most people. Very few people knew anybody who had MS. Today, this is just 40 years later, today, 1 in 250 people has IBS. 1 out of every 250, instead of 1 out of every 10,000. Crohn's disease is widespread. Yes, there is a genetic weakness that makes you more vulnerable to it. It particularly hits people who are Jewish, but it is widespread. But it is not because of the gene. The gene just makes people vulnerable, and pretty much everybody knows somebody who has MS. Why? You see similar numbers with asthma, lupus, and a whole host of other autoimmune disorders. So this, back in the 1990s, started fascinating this gastroenterologist by the name of Dr. Joel Weinstock. And he started looking into this and saying, what's the deal here? He noticed that pig handlers, pig farmers, people who worked on pig farms, didn't get asthma, didn't get multiple sclerosis, didn't get lupus, didn't get hay fever, weren't allergic to cats. They didn't have all this whole range of what we refer to broadly as autoimmune disorders. There's even speculation about things like arthritis. They didn't have it. They were also almost always infected by a worm that is very common with pigs that infects people but is easily fought off by the human immune system, so that typically the infection only lasts a few weeks. But if you work with the pigs, you continuously are reinfecting yourself. It's called Trichuris suis. It's called pigworm, is the common name. And that, all of these people were infected with Trichuris, and they had none of these diseases. And he thought, that's pretty amazing. So he took a bunch of Crohn's disease patients. And this is from some research that was actually done following on his work. Well, no, this is his work. It was reported by Moises Velasquez-Manoff in the New York Times. After ingesting 2,500 microscopic T. suis eggs at 3-week intervals, this is eating the eggs of the worms, right? 2,500 of them, for 24 weeks, 23 of 29 Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease is this disease that just basically the large intestine just starts to disintegrate, and it has to be cut out. I mean, people die from Crohn's disease. 23 of 29 Crohn's patients responded positively. 21 went into complete remission. In a second study, 13 out of 30 ulcerative colitis patients improved, compared with 4 people in a 24-person placebo group. Trials using I'm reading from the New York Times science section, trials using T. suis eggs on patients with multiple sclerosis, Crohn's, and hay fever are beginning in the United States, Australia, and Denmark, respectively. In Germany, scientists are planning studies on asthma and food allergies. In other European scientists, meanwhile, plan to replicate many of the experiments with Necantor americanus, which is the common American hookworm, the worm that, when I was a kid back in the 50s, everybody got from their pets. And kids used to be wormed just like dogs and cats used to be wormed. And back then, nobody had hay fever, nobody had asthma, lupus was rare as hen's teeth, or whatever the phrase is, and MS was really rare. Another scientist, Dr. David Pritchard at the University of Nottingham, he's working in Papua New Guinea in the 1980s, and he saw that these people who were infected with hookworms never got any of these autoimmune disorders. Here's another study. This was done by the British National Health Service. And this from an article in the New York Times that I reprinted quoted in my article in my book Threshold. Trial participants, they were given worms, right? People with god-awful allergies, cat allergies, house allergies, mold allergies, dust allergies. Trial participants raved about their allergy symptoms disappearing. Word about the study soon appeared online among chronic allergy sufferers, and a Yahoo group on helminthic therapy. Helminths is the category, class, phylum, order, whatever it is, for worms, sprung up. Many of the people who were given a placebo have requested worms, and many of the people with worms have elected to keep them, Dr. Pritchard said. So why does this have to do with saving the world? The point here is that we have become so disconnected from the fact that we are the product of 1,000,000 years of evolution, And during the 165,000 years that humans have been on this earth, all but the last 40 of those years, we had parasites. We continue to. We have also bacterial parasites. There's over 400, some would argue over 500 different bacteria in the gut. Most of them good bacteria. You know, acidophilus is the most famous one. And we have so disconnected ourselves from nature that we are killing ourselves at the same time we're killing nature. It's amazing, isn't it? Just consider it.